Hello and welcome to another video. In this series of videos, we'll talk about customizing the ArduPilot codebase, specifically how to modify the ArduPlane firmware for use with autonomous aircraft. In this first video, we'll focus on simply obtaining and setting up the codebase. Future videos in this series will cover building/compiling the code as well as getting it to run on your aircraft. So, let's go ahead and get started. In terms of an agenda for today, I'd like to cover 6 main topics. First, we'll talk about simply creating a GitHub account. Then we'll go over how to find and fork the ArduPilot repository. We'll then talk about cloning that forked repository down onto your local machine. And then we'll cover how to actually roll back to a specific release or version of the code that we'd like to work with, namely the 3.8.0. And then, once we have this code rolled back, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use an integrated development environment such as Visual Studio to navigate and edit the code. And we'll finally talk about updating the .gitignore file so that we'll be ready to go for future development. So the first 3 steps in this workflow are actually pretty simple. So to create a GitHub account, the easiest way to do that is obviously go ahead and just open a web browser, navigate to github.com, and go ahead and create a username here. So I'll assume that you're able to do that fairly easily. I've already made one for myself for the purposes of this demonstration, so I'm just going to go ahead and sign into my account, which happens to be CLumDemo, and then I'll go ahead and just enter in my password here and sign in. And I'm in. Now that I've signed into GitHub, the next thing I need to do is I actually need to find the source code for the entire ArduPilot project. So again, the easiest way to do that is just come up here to search GitHub and type in ArduPilot. And when I do that, it's basically the first hit. I see ArduPilot/ArduPilot. That's exactly the repository I'm looking for, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Now, this repository is the community version of the ArduPilot codebase. So a lot of people contribute to this. It's the active version of this, which is currently being developed. Now, we actually don't want to make changes or contributions to this version because this is being used by many people. Instead, what we want to do is create our own unique copy of this that only we get to play with. So GitHub calls that a fork operation. So forking means to actually make a unique copy of this and save it to our specific account. So since I'm already signed in up here, as you can see, as myself, CLumDemo, what I can do to fork this is simply go up here into the upper right and click on the fork button. And as you see, what that says is it creates a copy of this onto my account. So all I need to do here is go ahead and click fork. And you give this a few minutes here, and after it completes, you'll see that if I go back to my account, here we are. Here in my account, I now have a unique copy of the ArduPilot codebase that I can use to make modifications. So what I'm going to now want to do here is let's make a note of this URL. So once again, I'll go ahead and click on clone or download, and here's the URL for my remote repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the copy to clipboard button so that I have this thing copied. And now what I can do is let's go ahead and do the third step in our workflow, which is to clone this forked repository down to our local machine. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and find a place that I'd like to store this. So if I believe in some of our previous videos, what we did is I just put this on my C drive, and I think I had a folder called local git repositories. Here we are. Okay, so in order to clone this, I'm going to go ahead and minimize some of these. And I'll go ahead and start up Git shell here. And once this fires up here, again, Git shell is mostly just PowerShell with the PoshGit installed on top of it. I'll go ahead and cd to that directory. I think we said it was local git repositories. This is the place I want to stick all of my files here from GitHub. And then all I need to do is a simple git clone and then give it the URL of my forked one. So again, take a look at the URL, right? It's my account and it's my forked version of the ArduPilot codebase. So if I go ahead and hit enter here, that's just going to go ahead and download all of the ArduPilot software and codebase to my local machine. We can see it coming in right here in ArduPilot. And if I give this a few minutes to complete, I'll have the entire code base on my machine. And again, what's unique about this is it's my copy that I'm free to make edits and changes to, and I don't need to worry about it affecting the rest of the community here. So I'll give this a couple minutes and we'll come back and take the next step. Okay, and we're back, and I see that the clone in terminal has completed, so now I should have the entire repository here on my local machine. So if I look into here, yep, I see I've got all of my files right here for the ArduPilot codebase. So now might be a good time to actually, let's go ahead and add this repository to our GitHub desktop application. So let's go ahead and start up the GitHub desktop application, which again is our nice GUI that will help us see the status of a repository. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus button, and I'm just going to go click add like we saw in a previous video, and I will browse to that location, which I think was C, local GitHub repositories, ArduPilot, and click OK and hit add repository. And if I give this a second, here we are. I've got the ArduPilot codebase added now both in terminal and cloned to my local machine, and I've also added it to my GitHub desktop application. So finally, what we might want to do here is let's take a look at the codebase here in GitHub on the web interface so that we can get a rough idea of the complexity of this code and its scope. So as you can see, there are a lot of files here that make up the ArduPilot firmware / codebase. It's got a nice README, and actually what's really interesting here is there's 25 branches. So if I just click on this, we can see there are a lot of branches here. And the other thing that I want to pull your attention to here while we are on the website here is these 175 different releases. So if you click on this tab, you'll see there's been a lot of tags or milestones or releases throughout the project's lifecycle, and we'll be coming back to this a little bit later. So again, we at this point have got all of the code cloned or forked over to our own account, and then we have then cloned that forked copy of the code down to our local machine, and we're ready to do some development. So let's go back to the slides and take a look at that now. Alright, so we saw that the ArduPilot repository is fairly complex and it has multiple branches, which we're trying to illustrate here graphically as these straight lines. And each of these branches have multiple commits on each one of them, which again we're visualizing conceptually as these black dots. Now, the interesting thing is that each one of these commits, or these black dots, have what are known as a secure hash algorithm, or a SHA, also known as a commit ID, associated with each one of them. So the SHA is a 40-character unique value that identifies a commit exactly, and by its association, we therefore also know the branch that that's associated with. So for example, if I come over back to Git shell here, or the terminal, and let's go ahead and go into our repository, and I'm now in the repository we just cloned. If I go ahead and look at a git log, you'll see that all of these commits here, there's this long 40-character string associated with them. This here is that SHA, or that commit ID. So if you know this commit ID, you pretty much know an exact point in time, and again, by association, the exact branch that this work was done on. So let's go ahead and quit out of this and come back. So again, conceptually what we can do is we can think of each one of these as having a SHA associated with them. So for example, these 4 commits here have these 4 different SHAs. So for example, we can see that SHA-03 was made on the Arducopter 2.8.1 branch, whereas SHA-02 was made on the master branch. So what we want to do right now is we actually want to roll the code back to a known version of ArduPlane that we want to work with. So in this case, we want to work with ArduPlane 3.8.0, the release version of it, and then branch off from this point so that we can develop our own version of the 3.8.0 firmware. Once we have our own branch, which we're going to call in this case, for example, I'm using this for a class, so maybe AA441 is the class, but we want to make our own version of this branch, so I'm going to call this AA441 underscore V380. Once we have our own 3.8.0 branch, we can use this workflow and go ahead and create additional branches off of this and then merge it back into our branch and continue using this to develop features in our AA441 V3.8.0 branch. So conceptually, that's what we're going to want to do. What I would like to look at right now is doing the actual rollback procedure here so we can start adding some of these new functions here. Okay, so let's reset this picture to a state which represents the ArduPilot codebase just after we cloned it to our desktop, which looks like this. So as we discussed earlier, there are multiple branches associated with the codebase. Now, before we go any further, let's discuss a small side note that will be useful in a second. So, Git has this concept of the head, which for the most part is a reference to the last commit in the currently checked out branch. So, if we were to be working on the master branch, the head would simply refer to the tip here. Now, if we wanted to, say, switch branches and do, for example, say something like git check out APM rover 2 -3.1.1, that's equivalent of basically moving the head to the tip of that branch, which is fine because this is the tip of the branch, and any changes or edits that we make while we're on this branch will simply get added to the end of this specific branch. Now, what we actually want to do right now is we want to roll the code back to the ArduPlane 3.8.0 release here. And work from that. So what we need to actually do is we need to find the SHA or the commit idea which is associated with the ArduPlane 3.8.0 release. So in order to do that, the easiest way is to, again, fire up GitHub, go to your profile here, and go find the repository that you had just forked, which again, here's the ArduPilot one. And remember we talked about we would be coming back to this release tab? Well, let's do that right now. So this release tab, if you click on it, it's really nice because the developers of ArduPilot, anytime they release or make a major change here, they create what's called a release or a tag, which is going to allow us to easily find the versions of the code that we want to work with. So what we want to do here is let's keep scrolling through this and let's go ahead and find the ArduPlane 3.8.0 release. And aha, here it is, ArduPlane 3.8.0. So we see this was released on August 4th, 2007, and if we go ahead and click on this, this is part of the SHA. I actually want the entire SHA, so let's click on it here, and we'll see, here's the entire SHA, right here. So what I'm going to do here is let's go ahead and copy this. And also we'll make a note here that the name of the tag was Plane 3.8.0 because we'll see that a tag and the SHA, you can actually use them interchangeably. So if you don't want to try to remember or copy down this 40 character ID, you could also remember the tag name, which in this case was Plane 3.8.0. Anyway, now that I've got that, let's go ahead and come back to the slides here. And what we can notice here is I've gone ahead and found the tag in the SHA for the specific commit that I want to roll back to. So in this case, again, the tag was ArduPlane 3.8.0, and here's this giant SHA. So what I can now do here is let's go ahead and grab our git shell here and move him over. And again, I'm in the repository that I want, and let's see, I guess it's not going to be easy to show both at the same time, but I think everyone knows I've copied that. So let's go ahead and go and do a git checkout, and then I'll go ahead and paste in the commit ID that I looked for and I found. So if I hit enter here, this is going to roll the code back to the 3.8.0 version here. Now, when I do this, I'm going to get this interesting warning which says I'm in this detached head state. So what that means here is if we come back to the picture here, I've now moved the head back to this commit that I looked up. And we have this weird problem now in the sense that what's going to happen if I start making changes or edits to the code? Well, right now, it can't just keep getting added onto the same master branch because I'm not at the tip of this any longer. Instead, what we're going to have to do is we want to make our own branch off of this location. Call this thing something like AA441_V380, and I want all of my commits and my edits and my changes to be moving along this specific branch, which has split off from the master branch at the location that I just created. So in order to do that, here's the appropriate command to do this. So I'm going to do a git checkout, and I'm going to simultaneously create a branch, and I'm going to name it my AA441_V380, and then I'm going to pass the SHA, which is this specific location that I wanted to find here. Right? So again, let's go back to git shell, and we'll do that all at once. So I'll tell you what, I bet I can minimize this so we can keep the command in the same location. So again, let's go back to master. Check out master. So now I'm back at the tip of master, and we don't have this detached state any longer. Let's go ahead and clear just so I can see everything cleanly. Now, instead of doing a git checkout and just pasting in the SHA here, right? We saw earlier that that's going to put us in this weird detached head state. Instead, what I want to do is I'm going to create a branch, and I'm going to call this thing AA441V380. And then I'm going to put in the SHA. So what this is going to do now is it's going to create this new branch for me and switch to it, and hopefully everything is working now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and this is great. I've now created that branch. I'm not in a detached head state, and now all the changes that I make are going to go into this new branch. Alright, now that we've got this newly created branch, let's go ahead and do something on it. So I'll maybe go ahead and in the code, or in the folder, I'll go ahead and make a maybe AA441 README file. AndLl say this branch is used to generate custom code for the ArduPlane 3.8.0 firmware, right? Go ahead and hit save. Let's close that, and let's go ahead and do our typical git status to see if it's there. Yep, it is unstaged. So let's go ahead and add this to the staging area, and we'll go ahead and commit this locally. File to the new AA441V380 branch. Great, that's committed locally, and now let's go ahead and push this up to the remote and as our new branch that we want to use, like such. And if I push that up there, give it a second, and now we should see if we come back to our GitHub page here for our forked version of ArduPilot, we now see that there are 26 branches as expected, and here's our brand new branch, AA441V380. So we can now use this to continue doing some development. Alright, so let's come back to the slides here and see where we are. So we've seen that now we've created this branch, and we've made a single commit here on what we might consider to be a master branch now, because this is where we want to create all of our software, and all of our edits is now in this AA441V380 branch instead of the master branch, right? So what we want to do now is use this branch to continue developing new features. So for example, one of the last things we want to do in this video is we saw that the code base is fairly complicated, and one option would be to go about editing all these files and making the code changes you want using a simple text editor like Notepad, but I really don't like doing that. I'd like a full-fledged integrated development environment, something like Visual Studio, to manage all of these files and allow us to navigate and edit the code easily. So what I want to do right now is let's go ahead and create a branch that we're going to call Visual Studio off of our AA441V380 branch. So in order to do that, that's pretty simple. We covered the workflow to do that in a previous video. Let's go ahead and clear the terminal so we start from scratch here. And what we're going to want to do now is let's just go ahead and create that branch, right? So I'm going to say git branch Visual Studio. And now if I look at this, we've got, yep, the one that we created, and now we locally have the Visual Studio branch. Let's go ahead and switch to that branch. And now we're on the Visual Studio branch. And now what I can do is let's go ahead and use Microsoft Visual Studio to edit some of these files. So first what I'm going to need to do is start up Visual Studio and create a solution to contain all of these files. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull Visual Studio onto the screen here, and we'll go ahead and start a new solution. So I'll just say File, New Project, Empty Project, and let's put this in the folder where we have our repositories. So again, that's in C, Local Git Repositories, ArduPilot. This looks like a good spot. Let's go ahead and select the folder, and I don't know, let's call this project AA441 ArduPilot. Or actually, tell you what, let's call it the other way around. Let's call it ArduPilot AA441. There we go. And yeah, empty project, that looks good. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Give it a second to create this. And actually, you know what I may want to do? I can never get the directories and the folders correct. So I'm going to go ahead and save it all here in Visual Studio. Let's close this and let's go check the file directory to see how this was actually created. So let's go here to local git, where is it? C drive here, local git repositories, ArduPilot. Yeah, see, it always, I can never get this right. Visual Studio always wants to put it in its own folder. I don't want it like that. I want this all at the top level. So I'll go ahead and select all of these files, cut them, and let's go ahead and paste them here at this level. There we go, and I will go ahead and delete this folder here because I don't need this any longer. Okay, now if I go ahead and start a Visual Studio again, let's go ahead and open that solution file there. So I'm going to go ahead and say File, Open, Project/Solution. And again, I'll go here to my C, Local Git Repositories, ArduPilot, and here's the solution that I want to be working with. Great. Now everything should be working. All right, so what I want to do now is let's just go ahead and add a bunch of files to my Visual Studio solution. Again, the whole purpose of this is just to make code navigation and editing easier so I don't have to hunt and peck around in Windows Explorer and edit things using Notepad. I would like to use the full IDE and the power of Visual Studio. So let's go ahead, whoops, sorry, that's the wrong folder. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. And if you look here, the code base is pretty simple here. There's a bunch of folders here. The one that I'm mostly interested in is this one called ArduPlane. If I look in here, I see there's tons of .cpp and .h files here, and I basically just want to add all of these to Visual Studio so I can find them easily. So the easiest thing to do here is why don't I just make my Visual Studio directory mirror sort of the way the files are laid out in Windows Explorer. So maybe what might be easier is let's put this on one side here, and then we'll make Visual Studio sized appropriately on the other side, maybe so we can do things in parallel. Okay, here we go. Whoopsies, sorry. Let's try this again. Here we go. There. All right. So, all right. I don't need some of these folders. Let's go ahead and delete these things. Headers, resources, source files, delete. Okay. And let's go ahead and add some of these files now. So I'll go ahead and create a folder within my Visual Studio project. So I'll just say add new filter or a new folder. Let's call this ArduPlane, so it's the same as the ArduPlane over here. And now I can see all I need to do is just start adding these existing items. So I'll say add existing item. I'll go navigate to ArduPlane, and let's just select all of these here and go ahead and hit add. And give it a second here, and boom, there we go. So now all of these files are here in Visual Studio, and I can quickly and easily navigate around. I can use Visual Studio's commands like Control F to sort of find appropriate strings here. You can try to go to definition, and Visual Studio will try to do this. Now, the thing to maybe make a note of here is we're not looking to put all of the files in Visual Studio and build the code using Visual Studio. We're going to talk about that in a future video. Again, the only point of sticking all of this software and all these files in the IDE is so that I can easily find the files and navigate and make the edits I want here. Again, we're not going to actually use Visual Studio to compile anything. So again, let's go ahead and maybe hit save now. And if I come back here to Git shell, I can go take a look at what's our status here. And again, we see that there's a lot of things that were added. Now, a couple of things that we should maybe note here. There are a couple of files that we may not actually want to add up to the server. So we may need to modify the git ignore file because some of these things are auto-generated and some of them are user-specific for the particular environment I'm using right now. So again, there are certain files that I want Git to completely ignore. That is the point of this. Where is it? If I come here to the top level here of my repositories, there's this file called git ignore here. And if I open this thing up, you'll see that this is basically a bunch of rules here talking about which files to ignore when we're talking about staging and adding it, right? So the last thing that I want to do now is I actually want to ignore a bunch of files that are specific to Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And I think the easiest way to do that here is, again, let's go and navigate to, just open up GitHub here. I'll go ahead and open a Windows browser, or sorry, an internet browser. And we are going to actually go search for git ignore. And GitHub actually maintains a repository which has a ton of collections of a lot of very common things to ignore. So if, for example, if I scroll all the way down here to Visual Studio, oops, sorry, where did I go? Visual Studio.gitignore, here we go. If I click on this, it has all of these files that are usually used in a Visual Studio workflow, but I actually don't want them to be part of my Git scope here. So I want them to ignore. So what I can just simply do is, let's copy all of these. And there's quite a bit here. And let's go ahead, again, like I said, let's copy all of them. And then I'll come back to my git ignore file, which was right here. Let's double click to open that, and here we go. And just, I will add this to the bottom of this file here. So maybe I can make a note here, adding files to ignore for a Visual Studio workflow. Okay, and I'll just paste all of that I just got, save this file, close it. And now if I come back to my Git shell and I do a git status again, it's going to see that some of these things I modify my git ignore, but if you notice this hidden folder, this .vs, right, it's now being ignored because that's not something that I want to actually go up to the server. Now, this is great. I think I'm ready to start pushing this up to the server here, so I can go ahead and do my typical git add a. Let's add all these to the staging area, and let's go ahead and commit them locally. And I'll say adding a Visual Studio solution, as well as modifying the .gitignore for Visual Studio workflows. Okay, I'll commit those. And great, let's go ahead and push those up. So git push origin, and now to the Visual Studio branch here. And I think we're doing quite well at this point. All right, great, and there we are. So now let's talk about the next step here is maybe we want to go ahead and merge this branch into the master branch. So again, what we're going to do is we're pretty much done with this Visual Studio branch, right? It served its purpose. We were able to make some modifications and create a Visual Studio wrapper for a lot of this. So what I want to do now is I want to merge the Visual Studio branch into my AA441 v380 branch, right? So in order to do that, let's go ahead and git checkout my AA441 v380. There we go. We've now switched over to this. And what I will now need to do here is let's go ahead and merge in my Visual Studio branch, right? So git merge Visual Studio. Great, that is now merged in here, so I can go ahead and let's go ahead and again follow our good procedure here. Before I push, I'm going to pull. So I'm going to pull AA441. I'm pretty positive no one else has been working on this, but maybe someone has. Let's go ahead and check. Great, I'm up to date, so I am cleared to go ahead and push my 441 branch. All right, great. So it looked like that push has completed. So we've uploaded to the server here. So I think we're done with this Visual Studio branch. Let's go ahead and delete it. So let's delete it locally. So I'm going to go ahead and do a git branch-d Visual Studio. We can delete that locally. And now let's go ahead and push this up and delete from the remote or from the server, right? So delete Visual Studio, delete that from the remote repository. Give this a second here, and I think we should be good to go as soon as this completes. There, it was deleted. So let's come back here to GitHub, and again we will maybe go back to our profile here, and let's look at our specific code and see where we are. So here's our forked ArduPilot version. And again, if we go ahead and refresh this guy, and let's take a look at which branches we have. Great, we only have this AA441v380. The Visual Studio branch has been deleted, and it was deleted because if we look here into this branch, it now has the Visual Studio solution, and this is successfully rolled back to ArduPlane version 3.8.0. So at this point, I think we're completely set up and ready to go for development. So let's just go ahead and take stock again of where we are and what we've completed here in this video. All right, so here's the agenda / outline that we looked at earlier. And as you can see from this video, what we ended up doing is we started off by creating a GitHub account, and then we went ahead to step 2 where we found the community version of the ArduPilot repository and we forked it over to our own account. And then in step 3, we cloned our own forked version of the repository down to our local machine. And in step 4, we then did some work to navigate this detached head state and all of that good stuff to actually roll back the code to the v3.8.0 release and create a new branch, which we called AA441v380, which we're going to use to do all of our development in. Next, in step 5, we said, all right, instead of trying to navigate the code using Windows Explorer and editing things using Notepad or other rudimentary techniques, we wanted to use a full integrated development environment to navigate and edit the code. The one we used in this example here was Visual Studio, but obviously you're free to use whichever IDE you want. And then we saw that one of the consequences of adding an IDE like this is that some of these auto-generated files from the IDE don't actually need, or they should not be updated and uploaded to the server. So we had to update that gitignore file so it was appropriately ignoring the files that we did not want merged up. So at this point, what we've got is we have a viable code base that we should be able to use, navigate, and edit. And what we need to do next in one of our future videos is talk about how am I actually going to compile this code once I've got it on my machine. So hopefully I'll see you in the next video when we'll take a look at how to do that. Thank you so much.